In 1896, a portrait of a dollmaker was discovered in an old estate sale, but when experts examined it closely, they noticed something deeply unsettling about the subject's eyes. What they found would lead to one of the most chilling discoveries in the history of Victorian craftsmanship, revealing a darkness that had been hidden for over a century and would challenge everything we thought we knew about the boundaries between life and death. The photograph came to the attention of Dr. Margaret Whitmore, a historian specializing in 19th-century artisans, when she was called to authenticate items from the Blackwood Manor estate in rural Massachusetts. Among dusty furniture and forgotten heirlooms, this single portrait stood out like a beacon of dread. The image showed a thin, pale man in his 50s, dressed in the formal attire typical of the era. He stood beside a workbench covered with porcelain doll heads, their vacant stares creating an eerie backdrop to his solemn expression. At first glance, nothing seemed particularly unusual about Edmund Hartwell, as the name inscribed on the back of the photograph identified him. He was simply another craftsman from a bygone era, captured in his workshop during what appeared to be a routine documentation of his trade. But Dr. Whitmore possessed the trained eye of someone who had spent decades studying historical artifacts, and she noticed something that made her stomach turn with inexplicable dread. The dollmaker's eyes appeared to be made of the same glass material as the dolls surrounding him. The reflection, the unnatural shine, the complete lack of warmth or humanity in his gaze was identical to that of his creations. The more she studied the photograph under magnification, the more convinced she became that this was not a trick of the light or a photographic anomaly. The man's eyes had the same artificial quality, the same lifeless perfection that characterized the finest porcelain doll eyes of the Victorian era. It was as if someone had carefully removed his natural eyes and replaced them with glass orbs designed for toys, yet somehow he remained alive and functional. Intrigued and deeply disturbed by this detail, Dr. Whitmore began researching Edmund Hartwell with the determination of someone who had stumbled upon a mystery that demanded answers. What she discovered in the local historical records was far more sinister than she could have imagined. Hartwell had operated his doll-making business from 1885 until his mysterious disappearance in 1897. During those 12 years, he had gained a reputation for creating the most lifelike dolls anyone had ever seen. Wealthy families from across New England would commission his work, paying premium prices for dolls that seemed almost alive with personality and presence. The quality of his craftsmanship was legendary throughout the region. Parents would travel hundreds of miles to acquire one of his creations for their children, believing that owning a Hartwell doll was a mark of sophistication and taste. His dolls were so realistic that many people commented on how they seemed to possess actual souls, a compliment that Hartwell reportedly received with an unsettling smile that never quite reached his strange glass eyes. Local newspapers from the period contained numerous advertisements for Hartwell's services, each one promising dolls that would become cherished companions for life. The advertisements used language that seemed oddly specific, mentioning that his dolls would never leave their families and would watch over children with eternal devotion. At the time, these phrases seemed like clever marketing, but Dr. Whitmore began to see them in a much more sinister light. The first disturbing clue came from a newspaper article dated October 15, 1896. The headline read, "Local children report strange dreams after receiving Hartwell dolls." The article described how several children in the surrounding towns had complained of nightmares featuring their new dolls. Parents reported that their children claimed the dolls would move on their own during the night, speak in whispers that only they could hear, and watch them while they slept with those perfect glass eyes that never seemed to blink. Most adults dismissed these stories as childhood imagination run wild, but the frequency of similar reports from completely unrelated families was deeply unsettling to anyone paying attention. Dr. Whitmore dug deeper into the archives and found more troubling evidence buried in personal correspondence and diary entries from the period. A diary entry from Mrs. Catherine Mills, dated December 3, 1896, described her daughter's increasingly strange behavior after receiving a Hartwell doll for her 7th birthday. The child had stopped eating regular meals, claimed the doll was teaching her ancient secrets that she could not repeat, and began speaking in a voice that sounded nothing like her own. The entry ended with Mrs. Mills writing that she planned to return the doll to Mr. Hartwell immediately, despite the significant financial loss. But Mrs. Mills never got the chance to return the doll to its creator. 3 days after her diary entry, she and her entire family were found dead in their home, under circumstances that baffled local authorities. The official cause of death was listed as a gas leak, but witnesses who discovered the bodies reported details that were deliberately omitted from the official report. All 4 family members had been discovered with their natural eyes carefully removed and replaced by glass orbs, identical to those used in Hartwell's finest dolls. The precision of the replacement suggested the work of someone with extensive experience in such procedures. This discovery led Dr. Whitmore to investigate other mysterious deaths in the area during Hartwell's active period. What she found was a pattern of tragedy that seemed to follow his doll deliveries with disturbing consistency. Between 1885 and 1897, at least 15 families who had purchased Hartwell dolls met untimely deaths under suspicious circumstances. In each case, the victims were found with their natural eyes replaced by glass ones, and their Hartwell dolls were mysteriously missing from the scenes, as if they had simply vanished into thin air. The pattern became even more disturbing when Dr. Whitmore realized that the deaths always occurred within a month of the doll delivery. It was as if the dolls needed time to establish some kind of connection with their new families before whatever horrible process they facilitated could be completed. The consistency of this timeline suggested a methodical approach that went far beyond random tragedy. The research took Dr. Whitmore to the basement of the local courthouse, where she discovered a box of evidence from an investigation that had been abruptly closed in 1897 without explanation. The case files had been sealed and forgotten, buried under decades of bureaucratic neglect. Inside, she found testimonies from surviving family members, witness statements that had been dismissed as hysteria, and most importantly, a leather-bound journal that had belonged to Edmund Hartwell himself. The journal revealed the horrifying truth behind his extraordinary craft. Hartwell wrote about his belief that dolls could serve as vessels for human souls, a theory he had developed through years of studying ancient texts on soul transference and spiritual possession. He had developed a technique that he called soul harvesting, which involved a complex ritual performed during the final stages of doll creation. According to his detailed journal entries, he would lure families to his workshop under the pretense of custom fittings for their dolls. Once there, he would perform his ritual, trapping the souls of his victims within the porcelain bodies while transferring their life essence directly into himself through a process he had perfected over years of practice. The journal entries became increasingly erratic and disturbing as they progressed through the years. Hartwell wrote about hearing constant voices from his completed dolls, claiming they begged him day and night to release them from their porcelain prisons. He described feeling more alive and powerful with each soul he captured, but also complained of losing pieces of his own humanity in the process. The final entries suggested that he was no longer fully human himself, having systematically replaced parts of his body with doll components to better accommodate the stolen souls that he carried within him. Dr. Whitmore's investigation revealed that Hartwell's workshop had been discovered by local authorities in early 1897 after multiple families reported their missing relatives' last known location. What they found inside the building defied all explanation and haunted the investigators for the rest of their lives. The workshop contained over 200 completed dolls, each one disturbingly lifelike and bearing an uncanny resemblance to missing persons from the surrounding area. More horrifying was the discovery of Hartwell's transformation chamber, a room where human remains were found alongside specialized doll-making tools and ritual implements that seemed designed for purposes far beyond simple craftsmanship. But Edmund Hartwell himself was never found by the authorities. The investigation revealed evidence that he had fled his workshop just days before their arrival, somehow anticipating their approach. He had taken with him a carefully selected collection of his most prized dolls, including several that witnesses swore were still moving when they were loaded into his carriage. The remaining dolls in his workshop were ordered to be destroyed by fire, but several witnesses reported that some of them appeared to move and cry out in human voices as they were thrown into the flames. The trail went completely cold for over a century until Dr. Whitmore made her most chilling discovery. While researching property records to understand the full scope of Hartwell's activities, she found that the Blackwood Manor where the photograph was discovered had been purchased in 1897 by a man named Edmund Hartwell. The same Edmund Hartwell who had supposedly disappeared from his doll-making workshop, somehow acquiring the funds to purchase one of the most expensive properties in the region. This revelation led Dr. Whitmore to examine the Blackwood Manor's history more thoroughly, searching for any trace of its mysterious owner. In the estate's private records, She found evidence that the manor's owner had lived as a complete recluse for nearly 30 years before his recorded death in 1925. Servants who had worked at the manor during various periods described their employer as an ageless man who never seemed to grow older despite the passing decades, whose eyes held an otherworldly gleam that made them uncomfortable, and who kept a vast collection of dolls that he treated as beloved family members. The servants' accounts described strange occurrences throughout the manor. They reported hearing children's laughter coming from empty rooms, finding dolls in different positions each morning despite no one moving them, and experiencing an overwhelming sense of being watched by dozens of glass eyes whenever they cleaned the doll collection rooms. Many servants quit after only a few weeks, unable to tolerate the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to permeate every corner of the building. The most terrifying discovery came when Dr. Whitmore investigated the manor's basement with a team of specialists. Behind a hidden panel that had been concealed by decades of debris, she found Edmund Hartwell's final workshop. The room contained dozens of dolls in various stages of completion, along with his updated journals that documented decades of continued soul harvesting. The entries revealed that Hartwell had not only perfected his technique but had learned to sustain himself indefinitely by periodically capturing new souls from unsuspecting victims who visited the manor. The workshop also contained evidence of Hartwell's evolution as a practitioner of dark arts. He had expanded beyond simple doll making to create what he called soul anchors, objects that could trap and manipulate human spirits across great distances. These included mirrors, paintings, and photographs that served as windows between the physical world and the realm where captured souls were held prisoner. The final journal entry, dated just weeks before Hartwell's recorded death in 1925, contained his most horrifying revelation. He wrote about creating a masterpiece that would allow him to achieve true immortality beyond the limitations of his increasingly artificial body. This masterpiece was not a doll, but a photograph that could capture and transfer souls through anyone who looked directly into the subject's eyes. The 1896 portrait that Dr. Whitmore had been studying for weeks was this very photograph, created using techniques that combined photography with soul manipulation. Dr. Whitmore realized with growing horror that she had been staring into those glass eyes for weeks during her research, exposing herself to whatever malevolent influence they contained. She began experiencing the same symptoms described in the historical accounts: vivid nightmares featuring porcelain dolls, hearing whispers in empty rooms, and a gradual feeling that something foreign was growing inside her mind. She understood that Edmund Hartwell had found a way to continue his soul harvesting even after death, using his portrait as an eternal trap for unsuspecting victims. In her final report, Dr. Whitmore detailed her discoveries but warned that the photograph should never be viewed directly under any circumstances. She arranged for it to be sealed in a special lid-lined container and stored in a secure archive where it could never accidentally expose anyone to its influence. However, her warnings may have come too late for herself and the several assistants who had already fallen victim to Hartwell's final trap. The Blackwood Manor was demolished shortly after Dr. Whitmore's investigation concluded, but the destruction process was fraught with unexplained incidents. Workers reported finding dozens of additional dolls hidden throughout the building, many of which appeared to move when no one was directly watching them. All dolls and artifacts from the manor were destroyed under strict safety protocols, but some locals claim that the destruction was incomplete and that certain items were secretly preserved by collectors who didn't understand the danger they represented. Today, the Hartwell case remains one of the most disturbing examples of how evil can persist beyond death through seemingly innocent objects. Dr. Whitmore's research serves as a warning about the dangers of investigating certain historical mysteries too deeply. Her fate, after completing the investigation, remains unknown, as she disappeared shortly after submitting her final report, leaving behind only her research notes and a growing fear among those who knew her work. The story of Edmund Hartwell and his soul-trapping dolls reminds us that some crafts are better left forgotten, and some portraits are better left unseen. The next time you encounter an antique doll with eerily lifelike eyes, remember that not all toys are meant for innocent play, and some artisans serve purposes far darker than simple entertainment. If this story has left you wondering about other cursed objects hidden in plain sight, make sure to subscribe for more chilling historical mysteries. Have you ever encountered an antique that gave you an unexplainable feeling of dread? Share your experiences in the comments below, and remember to keep looking over your shoulder because you never know what might be watching you back.